It is interesting that Christ Jesus decided to very pointedly address people with disabilities. Maybe Jesus was having us see that He is success. We are complete in Jesus alone, not in anything else, not with or without a disability.
Welcome, friends, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. I'm delighted to introduce to you two special guests in the studio today, Randy and Evie Mogler. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Randy and Evie have agreed to have a conversation with me around a very special topic. And that topic is those things that concern the world of those with special needs. Adults, children with special needs, their parents, caretakers, the wider community, and in particular, the church. I want to give both of you an opportunity now just to speak a little bit to your intersection with special needs.
Oh, yeah. Well, we were just saying before we began that it was 50 years ago this year that both Evie and I were at Illinois State University, and we started our careers in special education for different reasons. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, Evie, but there's been a trail of experiences, information, beautiful people, challenges, joys that has been a part of this journey. Of course, we see things differently than we did 50 years ago. Both of us worked at Apostolic Christian Life Points for 30 years. We're retired. So that's a piece of that. I'll let Evie speak to her own experiences. But particularly in Washington, our local church, Washington Church, we've had some great exposure and inclusion of individuals with challenges. And so that has helped shape who we are. Actually, quite frankly, some of our best friends are individuals with challenges of one variety or another.
Let me cut in right now for something I think that's important, and then Evie, I'll like to hear from you as well, but the vocabulary we use. Mm-hmm. The terms we use are important, and I think some of us wonder, what term should I be using? So I used special needs. I hear you say challenges. Mm-hmm. Are both of those good terms? Is there a difference in those terms? What terms should we be using?
So interesting. Again, Evie, you can speak for that too, but terms have changed, come and gone. Mm-hmm. Part of it is mentality, it's heart. It's how we process who we're talking to and who we're including. A person with a challenge is a word that's being used. A person with special needs, a child with special needs are words that are being used. Some words that have been seen as more debilitating, handicapping a person more than they might really be, would be terms like mentally retarded. Mm-hmm. That's an example of something that's been switched or changed. People are referred to, those individuals who have challenges in that way are people with intellectual disabilities, for example. Before 50 years ago, a person with an intellectual disability was considered a moron, and we couldn't even imagine using that as a person with an intellectual disability. So you're right. I don't think we have to overemphasize or obsess on the words that we use, but I think that sometimes the words, the vocabulary, the way we say things about people does shape our view of that individual.
I think that distinctive is helpful, right? And just even if you look at that word moron, what you're doing is you're placing identity on them, right, as fully described by their challenge. A person with a challenge is that. The emphasis is on personhood.
Amen.
With a challenge. Those are vastly different. I think that rubric is helpful, right, as we think about this. Yeah. Evie, your backgrounds, you were at ISU as well?
I was. And my introduction to people with challenges actually began when I was almost 12 years old. I was 11 when my sister was born. And so I always trace my career back to that day on the piano bench when my mom said, Evie, sit down here. We're going to have a little talk. I want to tell you some things about your little sister. And I can remember that day as clear as if it were yesterday. Wow. So I always tell people that's what the day my career was born. And my mom's attitude and the way she began teaching me about my little sister was just pivotal with how my life has gone.
Did that come pre-birth or after birth, that conversation?
Well, it was in 1963, so it was after birth. My mom and dad had no idea that Karen had Down syndrome.
And see, this is the point that I want to make, too, is that special needs comes in so many different packages. For some, you go into the birthing process aware. But others, that realization of a special needs existing drips out over time. Over 4 or 5 years, that a raw reality is at place. Does that make sense?
It does.
So anyway, I just wanted to accent that point, that it comes about in different ways.
Oh, yeah. What you're saying is so accurate. Say, for example, someone at 12 years old has a stroke, or someone has a bicycle accident and they have a closed head injury and traumatic brain injury. In terms of legal issues and funding issues, that individual, if it's under 21 years old, would be considered having a developmental disability. Should the individual have a closed head injury or a traumatic brain injury after 21, it changes the way the person is serviced, the way the person has services provided, and also the stressors on the family. Yeah. Siblings are often grown or older if it's over 21. Parents are older, so there's lots of other circumstances. But what you say is, this topic of a developmental disability is huge. It's very expansive. It includes lots of people with lots of varying supports that's needed. Yeah. But it all points back to Psalm 139. He knew us when we were created in the womb. He knows our standing up and our sitting down. Every person is precious in God's sight. We're created in His image. These are all things that are very strong factors in how we see this picture, but we have to realize that we're talking about a variety of supports.
A variety of things. Okay, my mind is exploding with things that I want to talk about, Randy, and we're going to get back to God. Put this in context of the gospel. So we're not going to leave that one go. We're going to come back to it. But I do want to place my finger on this expansive nature of it. You know, as you were talking about that, I'm a category person. I like to put things in different buckets. It helps me understand. But really, as you shared that about a person having internal brain injury, that is something that came about through a tragic event. Right? So we have these special needs that come about through a tragic event. In the case of your sister, it was genetic, right? So we have things that come in ways of nobody's fault. Then we have those that come in the ways of perhaps somebody's fault. And that, again, adds layers of difficulty, doesn't it?
It does.
So, Evie, you have this vivid memory there on the piano bench, and you would trace your heartbeat for those with these special challenges to occur there. Bring us a little bit along on that journey.
Just even anticipating this podcast made me do some reflection back to, the growing up years with having a sibling who had a special need. Yeah, I've been reflecting about that. Several things occurred to me, but one of them was how wise my parents were. And I know where their wisdom came from. It came from God, because 50 years ago, many families were being told if they had a child with Down syndrome that it would ruin their family or it would be difficult, and that the child should not live with the family, grow up with the family. And so my parents really had a gift of a good pediatrician who chose a different path. And he said, take her home and love her. She's going to be great for your family. And you have 5 older girls who are going to be great models for her. So she's going to learn even more. So my parents have always been thankful to God and to this physician who kind of steered him in the right direction for Karen.
With not interrupting too much, I want to say this, Evie, because what's so encouraging about that is how God equipped the parents. That's what you said.
Yes.
God equipped the parents to make the right decision. I just want to accent that point because I think that a lot of parents feel totally ill-equipped.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you. Go on.
One thing my dad said that was quite profound is, I don't remember at what point, but sometime during that first year, they didn't actually know at the time of birth, but she didn't develop normally, and so they were going to the pediatrician. So during those difficult times, those difficult months, I remember my dad telling us and others in the family, like extended family, he said, first I thought, why us? And then he said, I thought, why not us? And that, again, is a pivotal thing that steered my life and others that I've shared it with.
That was part of the family's feeling.
I think so, don't you? Yeah, I think it was the attitude. And I distinctly remember my mom saying, defining what in those days it was the word retarded, like Randy mentioned. Yeah. And so she said, have you ever heard of that word? And I want to tell you what it means. And she explained it means that it actually technically means slow. So she said it's not a bad word. It just means Karen's going to learn really slow. And the best thing you can do for her is to teach her. And so that's why I say that was a pivotal moment in my life, because my mom is the one who said, you can help her.
That you're a part of this picture.
You're a part of this picture.
Part. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You know, you both mentioned back at ISU 50 years ago. Is that right?
Yes.
Was special education rare, or was it budding? I'm just curious, what it looked like?
Historically.
What's the history here of special needs
Well, historically, yes. So it was budding. I think there was the most pivotal moment in terms of history, recent history, is 1973, when the Public Law 94-142 was enacted by Congress, which said that all children in the United States have the right to a free, appropriate public education. Not only education, but life. In fact, some of these moms and dads from the 1950s were so instrumental in this movement. For example, in our community in Illinois, in central Illinois, mom and dad, along with other parents, were responsible for the first educational programs for people with developmental challenges.
No kidding.
Karen was 3 years old when she got on a city bus that was then driving from Eureka to downtown Peoria, and they would walk her down the hill. Can you imagine putting a 3-year-old girl with Down syndrome with limited language on a bus to go downtown Peoria? But they were very instrumental, this group of parents, in developing that. And so from around the country that occurred. So we're talking a stepping up in the 1950s.
But that stepping up wasn't just policy. What I hear is this is a community stepping into this space, right?
Absolutely.
To put your child on a city bus meant that she was understood in the community for what she was doing and needed the assistance to carry that out.
Provisions, services, supports emanates from the hearts of people, because the heart of God is that all people, whosoever will, can come to him. All people. Culture has grown to understand the need for inclusion and the beauty of people and what they offer, the totality of society, people with challenges and what they offer.
One thing that's kind of heartbreaking for me, because of the passion I have about this, is in some of our travels that we've been gifted with from the Lord, we have talked with people in other parts of the world, and we always, because of our interest, seek to meet people with special needs or visit schools, and we've had a variety of experiences doing that and shared with people and learned. And it's just heartbreaking sometimes to hear that some of the attitudes that probably our great-grandparents' generation had are still existing today in this world.
Right.
But if children are born with special needs, what happens to them is pretty heartbreaking and hard to talk about.
So the climate around the world varies quite a bit with this issue.
Yes, very much so.
I want to go back now and pick up on the comment that you made. Psalm 139, I think, is what you quoted, Randy. You talked about God. Let me set this up with John chapter 9. In John chapter 9, Jesus sees a blind man. He engages the brokenness of this man. In fact, we see Christ engaging with the brokenness throughout the Gospels. But in that particular story, the disciples were pretty quick to ask why. And I think that's a natural question. I understand the consequences of sin, for example. And so the brokenness that falls out of those consequences, there's some sort of explanation. I think there is a question that lies on so many that says, why? There's no traceable reason for the brokenness I see in my child. Does that make sense? And so I think they ask with the disciples, why? Could you help us understand from a Godward perspective, from your experience and as you've thought about this?
It's a deep one.
Yeah.
It is interesting that Christ Jesus, our Jesus, decided to just very pointedly address people with disabilities, even people with acquired disabilities. We would call it AIDS in these days, or maybe some other challenge that's harder to alleviate. maybe this brokenness that we face is one of God's megaphones to get us back to himself. In fact, I think when someone with a special need, a child with a special need or a person with a disability is entering the scene, whether that's through birth or a childhood or whatever situation, it causes us to look back through a different lens at values that we look at. What is success? How do you define that? Maybe Jesus was having us see that he is success. We are complete in Jesus alone, not in anything else, not with or without a disability. We're complete in Jesus.
I like that, Randy, because I think in that passage, does he not say that for the glorification of God?
He does.
He says that I am the light that all men need. And then he heals the blindness. But I think just exactly what you said, Randy, he sets himself up as being the ultimate answer that all brokenness points to.
Yes.
Is that fair enough to say?
We sometimes talk about Karen, who has gone to be with Jesus. She loved him. She was 48 when she died. But we wonder when we get to heaven, we have this big debate, like, I want her to have Down syndrome. That's who she is. She was wonderful. I had a dream about Karen, and in the dream, she was back. She looked like she did, but she looked healthy. And she had Down syndrome features, but she was looking in a room with mixed people, some people with challenges and some without. And it's almost like she was there to say, keep going. There's a purpose in this. But she didn't say that. She didn't use words. It was so profound because she was so okay and so healthy and so good. And now whether that's legitimized, we don't know. This is a different realm. This is God's realm, not ours. But
here's what you've just cast, okay? Here's very profound, right? And that is all the fixing that Karen needed was not her Down syndrome.
That's right.
That's so true.
That's right.
That's so true, Matt.
That is absolutely right. And people, parents, I think other professionals, when they're confronted with this diagnosis or whatever it is that causes you to know that you have someone with special needs, that's one of the first modes we get into. Maybe it's our cultural background, but it's the fix-it mode. And you just try to find every way that you can. Some of that's good. There's tremendous supports and systems available to help people these days. In fact, this podcast is saying the church is here to help as well. And we want to come alongside. We want to understand, teach us is what the mode is. But we do get into the fix-it mode, and some of it is not that. Some of it is just enjoying who God has put in front of us.
I want to go now to that next point that I wanted to pause and talk about, and that is the value that they bring.
Yes.
I think we've gotten to know Karen just from this conversation. I can probably guess some of these, but if you were to place your finger on some of the unique value that you would have been without had she not had her special need, what are some of those?
That's a good question. I think it would be stretching all of us to see things we would have not seen. I'm kind of speaking for my sisters and my parents right now, too. But we learned things, of course, like love and patience and giving up your own desire. If Karen didn't want to go on a hike, somebody had to stay back with her because she didn't, her feet hurt. And so she couldn't always hike as far as we wanted to hike. And when we were growing up, things like that. We learned those things, too, which were great character development for us as an adult. Looking back, we could all name so many things. But to sum it up, I think I would say that she made my world bigger, and I learned more about this world and, of course, about
the world to come.
The world to come. And she taught me about perseverance in suffering, too, because I've been kind of painting her, and Randy does too, which, of course, those are the precious memories now as being a gift from God and how fun she was. But they were also difficult valleys that she walked through. And we walked through with her when she struggled with things in life that were tough. Going through those with her, it just opened our world to a world we wouldn't know. And I can distinctly remember my mom saying once, and Karen had lots of doctors. In fact, one of her quotes is she used to say, I have 100 doctors. And she kind of did. So despite all the professional help, and they were wonderful, I'm not just counting that, but I remember my mom through some of the worst of times saying, God is the best physician of all. He is the one that is doing this, that's just helping us through all of this and helping the doctors to help her. Mm-hmm. So I hope that's the answer to the question.
No, I like that. And I would like to, Randy, key in on a comment that you made, that they challenge success. Do you remember that comment?
Yes.
Can you speak to that? Because I think there's something very powerful there. They challenge what we think success is.
Yes, they challenge to what we think abilities are. Mm-hmm. They challenge us to think what success is. I think sometimes they challenge us to think what love is, what makes you happy. I think individuals challenge us on all those levels. I guess it just goes back to personal testimonies when I thought I was giving and suddenly I realized I was receiving. Mm-hmm. And that made me see differently persons with disabilities. And so, for example, there was a grown man with autism. It was very hard for him to be overstimulated with a lot of things, a lot of visuals, a lot of noise. So there was a fall Wiener roast, and we sat on bales of hay and did what you do at Wiener roasts. And this guy came and sat next to me, and I said his name, and I said, I can't believe this. You are amazing. It took so much for you to come and sit by me. You were able to sing. You gave me more than I expected. You participated in my life, and I sang, and it was joyous.
Randy,
to sit next to you.
I want to capture something here. Mm-hmm. Okay. What you've just done is you've helped us see that individual is an overcomer.
Yes.
Extreme overcomer.
Yes.
His challenges might seem like a low bar for us, and so we miss it as an overcoming moment. Does that make sense?
Profound. Yes.
And with special needs and those with challenges, meet their high bar in the everyday routines of life. Mm-hmm. And for them to get to the end of the day is quite an overcoming testimony.
Oh, yes. It was his energy and his humanness, his humankind within him that God created within him that was so beautiful. But it was also a byproduct of people who were supporting along the way. And I think he felt safe with me. He must have. I don't know why, but he felt safe coming next to me. Or maybe some of us gamble with relationships. He was going to gamble and see what I was going to do.
I think this is a great segue into a place where we want to go with this conversation, because you just talked about, Randy, this surrounding community that helped him with that overcoming and get to the place where he needs to be. What should we be thinking? What should the lens be through which we see individuals? Does that make sense?
Jesus is foundational. He reached to people, quite frankly, most of us really don't know what to do and say with someone with a disability.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Randy, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Speak to that reality.
There are ways to support every single person. There was a family that came to visit Washington Church with a young adult gentleman who has significant challenges with autism. And I don't mean to just say autism. There's others as well. And his mom and dad came and were church coaches. And he was included at all levels of the worship in our church. And so this family must have given some visuals about what the schedule will be, who they will see, where they will sit. He might have had a need to escape. I think they might have even had something like a cushion or whatever for him to sit on, to know that was his place. If he stood up, knew to sit back down there. He joined in for the lunch. He sat with us at the table, bowed his head and prayed. The young man worshiped.
Yeah.
He worshiped in our church with adaptations. Now, that's a stretch because that required quite a few things. But the congregation was willing. And actually, as we all looked on, we were learning a ton of stuff from this guy, this brother who was, he was showing us what to do. Yeah. There are people who show us what to do.
I like that, Randy. And I like the thoughtfulness of the congregation to accommodate, right? Yeah. To say, you know what? How can we make this work?
Inclusion is on a variety of levels. It depends on the person's need. Maybe a full worship service in the church sanctuary isn't exactly what that person needs. At what level can they be most fully included? Would that be for the lunch? Would that be for a hymn sing? Would that be for other parts of that? Help design that around the person's needs, but don't just say the person can't necessarily participate. Maybe with supports they could, but don't push the button either if that's not something that would be good for that person to be included.
And Evie, I want to turn to you now because no doubt you had this experience many times. You no doubt were confronted with how people reacted towards your sister. Does that make sense?
It does.
So
yeah.
What could you tell us, right? Here are a few tips.
Yeah. Well, she knew everyone in our home church that she grew up with by name if they spoke to her. We noticed that later as she was growing up. We noticed the people she knew were the people who paid attention to her. Not to say anything bad about the people who didn't. They were probably in that category we just talked about where they didn't know how to do it.
Right.
The people who sat down next to her at the round stools and at the coffee table that said, "Hey, how are you?" She knew which ones knew her.
Engage is really what I'm hearing you
and
say.
I exactly. Just smile and say hello. Yeah. That's enough.
Yeah.
And Karen responded to that. If people called her by name, she remembered their name.
The more you give, the more you're going to get, even if you fail in the process. Mm-hmm. There's risks. There's risks involved in everything, in our interactions, in our relationships, in what we do as people, in what we do spiritually. There's risks, and we can't protect people from risks, including people with disabilities. Yeah. We can't protect them from the risk of failure and us from the risk of failure too, because we learn by our failures. Mm-hmm. We grow and change from those.
But to Evie, your point, Karen remembered all those names of engagement.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some of those were awkward and perhaps fell flat.
They might have used vocabulary she didn't understand, but she understood the smile and say hello.
Yeah.
That's enough.
And this is where I'm going to cut in on our conversation with Randy and Evie. But when we return, we're going to continue with this concept of engagement with some tremendously practical tips on how to engage those with special needs. We look forward to that episode. Thanks, everyone, for being along. Goodbye.